Talk to me about your dry fire series. Why a dry fire series, and what is that about?
So the dry fire series, because dry fire is probably the most important thing you'll do for your firearms training. You can go live, but it's kind of like what we talk about white belt on white belt murder, where you have two guys who don't really know what they're doing, and you just turn them loose. You
Mhm.
drill a little bit, do a few drills, and then go. And then we scratch our head and wonder why they're not understanding jiu-jitsu, and they're just headlocking each other and all this other stuff. And so having that period of time where it's a drill intensive, technique intensive, skill building period of time is essential so that down the road they can actually enjoy this stuff and go fast and do all the cool things they see. And it's the same with firearms. You have to have that period of dry fire. You have to have that period where it's just skill building and you just groove in good motor patterns or good movement patterns. You build that mind to muscle connection, whatever we want to call it, and you ingrain really good, safe gun handling habits. And so the best place to do that is dry fire, where the penalty for making a mistake is zero. There's no penalty. So it was really beat into my head early in the police academy, the importance for dry fire. And then a number of the guys that I've trained with over the years, mentors in the firearms world, were always really big on dry fire and how important that is, and how you just, unlike other activities that we do, you can learn so much through just dry fire with that no live ammo anywhere in the room, just working through the mechanics of mounting the rifle or the pistol and driving it into the target and pressing the trigger cleanly and just making a good habit, building a good habit. And so I thought for our first one, we should do something on dry fire. And also, with ammo prices being what they are now, it's probably best to find ways to train without having to spend a couple grand just to go to the range.
Yeah, for sure. That's actually a really good analogy I haven't thought of before, but sending someone who hasn't spent much time with a firearm yet out to the range and just have them fire live rounds without all that training first really is kind of like having two brand new white belts just roll without doing jujitsu first.
Yeah.
I almost wonder if you wind up creating bad habits. In jiu-jitsu, we know that creates bad habits, which is why we don't do it at the gym. We make them go through a process, and then we put them into that. And I wonder if it would almost be the same thing with firearms. You actually make your learning curve longer when you do it that
You absolutely do. We find when students would come into classes and they would tell us their background, they would consider themselves to be intermediate level shooter or something of that sort. And then we get them down on the range and just see some bad habits. And it's like, man, we have to basically dismantle them and rebuild them because they just got bad habits. You see them, they're doing their mag change, their fingers on the trigger. They're not monitoring the muzzle direction correctly. They're just flagging people and all kinds of just bad habits. They don't. You can look at their gear and see how their gear is set up and tell that they've got some bad habits and nobody's ever corrected them. Nobody's ever set them up from the beginning to be successful.
way.
And so when we start looking at that, it's like, man, they really need a dry fire practice to begin with. They really need something in the beginning that sets them on the right path so that when it's time to go live, safety is not an issue. The weapons handling is not an issue. And if you give them commands, they know exactly what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And also what it does too is it kind of their programming is better because when you give them an exercise to conquer, they don't really have to think about the gun handling portion of it. They just think about how do I get from point A to point B and accomplish that goal. And so because the gun handling is all just built in now, they don't have to think about how do I mount the pistol or mount the rifle and how do I find the dot or how do I get the sights aligned. All that's done through dry fire. So now we just give them a challenge, something to negotiate, some sort of like move from, the driver's side of the car to the front passenger side of the car, make a few hits on this target, now move back to the passenger side of the car and apply a training tourniquet to this medical dummy. Just a simple task like that. If you have somebody come in that doesn't have a baseline of skill, say like a two-stripe, 2-stripe white belt level of skill with the firearm, you bring them into that, you're going to have all kinds of things go wrong.
Yeah.
There's just all kinds of stuff goes bad, and then you have to just start over. So having that dry fire component in place where they've ingrained all the good habits, learned how to do everything properly, it just makes it so much easier, and they progress so much faster.
For sure. I had an opportunity to work with Ray, I think about a year ago, and I just one-on-one for the weekend shooting with him, which was awesome for me. But I've also got a chance to work with you and Andy Stump out in Montana. And every time I work with coaches that know what they're doing, it brings me back to what we've always talked about in SBG, because it's exactly the same thing. It's fundamentals. There's no advanced technique. It's just fundamentals. Whether Andy talking about the highest level stuff that they do, it's always those same fundamentals, grip and trigger pull and side alignment, and everybody has a slightly different way to do it, but all of you guys constantly go back to those core fundamentals. And it seems so obvious that transcends all of fighting, whether we're talking about with tools or without tools, or the principles that we use for jiu-jitsu are really identical. Even the base and posture and connection piece seems to fit perfectly with what you're doing with handguns.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely you have to have that good base and then build posture out of that. And then the connection is yourself to whatever it is you're driving.
The tool, yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So, and then MDoc 2, what do we put in MDoc 2 for people that got MDoc 1 who don't know what it is?
So MDoc 2 is just basically we're building off of the skills we had in the MDoc 1. And this is more geared towards people who are combat sport athletes who can then apply different things that, for someone who doesn't train, it's easier just to teach them a helmet. It's easier just to teach them to crash into somebody. But for somebody who trains, teaching them a form of a long cover that then allows them to access tools and weapons and those various challenges, it's just basically it's taken even more of their sport skill and applying it to the street, transferring it over to the street. So in MDoc 1, obviously we're going to be heavily weighted towards the stuff we do in sport and making that, just showing people how it just transitions with few modifications to a self-defense scenario. With MDoc 2, we take the more advanced stuff of the sports side of the house. So somebody who's at a blue belt level or higher, things that they can do, now we show them it's the same stuff. It's fundamentals. You just make those transitions, make a few tweaks or adjustments, and now it works in the self-defense realm.
Mm-hmm.
Leave about 90-some-odd% of it behind immediately and not waste your time on it.
Yeah. So much of that too is like a magic. They're searching for a magic bullet, aren't they?
Yes.
And, it's like really you should be wondering about how you fundamentally escape cross sides, how you wind up at cross sides, how you get out from cross sides against somebody bigger and stronger. I'm like, ooh, a choke I can catch somebody with and surprise them once, maybe if they're not paying attention, then potentially bust my knee out, and you're going to build a game around that.
Yeah.
And the longer somebody has that mindset of trying to find these little tricks, generally the worse their jiu-jitsu is, right? I had a guy come through town a while ago who was a brown belt, strong guy, and he told me he travels from gym to gym to gym, didn't have his own gym. And I watched him roll with the students, and I could see he had very particular routes that he goes to all the time, and he had a lot of tricks, like little things he was doing. So he was getting the students with that stuff. And then we rolled, and I just held him down, and that was that. And then one of the students was asking me about it earlier, and he's like, well, what was going on there? And I'm like, well, you just didn't see that before. You were caught by surprise. And you're close enough that he could do that. But I guarantee you, if you rolled with him for another 2 or 3 times, you would shut down every single one of those things, at which point you would see that your positional skills are actually a lot better than his, where you'd be able to pass his guard, you'd be able to hold him down, you'd be able to escape if he got on top of you.
Yeah.
So in essence, your jiu-jitsu is much better. You're just not used to those routes.
Sure.
And but what struck me was what a waste of time that was for that guy. He's been doing jiu-jitsu. He'd been doing jiu-jitsu for like 25 years,
Sure.
but I could still see underneath the scaffolding of his game that he'd put together that there wasn't any foundation.
It's a veneer.
Hmm?
It's a veneer at that point.
Yeah.
And I think of those types of things too, the buggy choke or whatever this guy was doing. They're like magic tricks.
Yeah.
And
Once you've seen it,
if you
right?
don't know it, it's like you get caught.
Right.
If you know it, if someone shows it to you one time, it'll never work again.
Exactly.
It's like you'll know what that is, and forever you won't be fooled by it.
Right. And or if your fundamentals are that much better, you know, it's like Hodger's not going to get buggy choked by
No. Nor, he's not going to get buggy choked, and he could tell you,
Not
I'm
to
going
do
to mount you and cross choke you,
Right.
and you can still do it. He doesn't need to trick you.
No, no, which is the beautiful part about jiu-jitsu.
Yep.
So with all that information out there, what do you say to the white belt who's now just got the bug of jiu-jitsu and they're hungry for more information?
If they'll listen to me, I would say you're going to get more information than you can handle just coming to class.
Mhm.
Right? The really bad people in every discipline, because it could be at school, it could be jiu-jitsu, it could be anywhere, are the ones who, let's say, like for university, my class are 3 hours a week, and let's say jiu-jitsu, like an average person's coming to 3 days a week, right? So you're seeing someone 3 hours a week. They can barely make that. They're tired. You know, oh man, my wife, my girlfriend, my boyfriend, my husband. So barely making it, and they're tardy sometimes, and they're absent sometimes. So they're like struggling to get through 3 hours. But then they'll spend like 7 hours or 9 hours on the internet trying to figure out why what you taught them is wrong.
Right.
You know, who told me, who's showing something different than my jiu-jitsu coach? Who's saying something different than my Korean literature professor? And it's like, you already have too much information. Like you can't do what I showed you. Why would you be able to? You saw it yesterday. Work on that. You know, if they'll listen to me, it's like you're getting more than you could handle already.
I always tell them to stay off YouTube unless they're on our channel, and then they should watch it.
Because that's review.
Right. Right. I had a student one time, well, I have a student, very smart, and training for a long time, but was always trying to beat jiu-jitsu.
Sure.
Not just me, but beat jiu-jitsu, like to game the system. And they'd go through phases of leg locks, and there was phases of guillotines and all kinds of weird stuff. And but they really plateaued because of that, you know. And then they'd roll and be the same outcome. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. And then you get on top of them and hold them down. And eventually they stopped doing that and just started paying attention to what I was showing in class. And then lo and behold, they started to get a lot better. And they were like, I don't understand what's going on right now. Well, you're not trying to game the system anymore. You're learning jiu-jitsu instead of going home and thinking about how you can beat jiu-jitsu. You know, you can't outsmart jiu-jitsu or evolution.
Nope.
It's always smarter than you are.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's super weird. And you're in here, so you've obviously found jiu-jitsu. So on some level you've succeeded. Because you're not someone who's pretending to teach you how to fight, but actually not.
Right.
So you're smart enough to get in here, but you're not smart enough to trust me. Because if these guys, these white belts or blue belts, purple belts, whoever, they come after me really hard. And it's just like, if this were gonna work, there'd be no reason for you to pay me money to teach you. Like you're only gonna get hurt.
Right.
If you train this way.
Right.
You're gonna go so fast that you don't even know how I got you, so you're not gonna learn anything. So I'm gonna get you anyway. It's like you really actually trust jiu-jitsu and you trust me. It's like, just slow down. Be here to learn.
That's really the benefit of having if you do have a good coach that's focused on fundamentals, all you need to do is just trust your coach and show up to class.
Yeah.
Makes it easy.
Yeah. So many people find that hard.
Yeah. That's why I think the guy I was referencing before, I don't think it was a coincidence or unrelated that he didn't have a gym that he went to. You know what I mean? He traveled, bounced around from gym to gym. Probably didn't trust me or any particular instructor, right? And then picking up a little thing there and a little thing there, and always measuring himself based on his last roll, you know, and like a gunslinger trying to go into town and finish everybody. But it's really just a waste of time.
Yeah. And how old was he?
My age.
So I mean, if you already saw what his game
Maybe a
was
little
like,
bit younger.
no, but give him 10 years too. It's like
Right.
that kind of game.
Yeah.
You said he's younger, stronger, whatever.
Yeah.
That's not sustainable either.
So you mentioned earlier distinction between physical attributes, explosiveness, strength, things like that, and jiu-jitsu technique. And one of the things that I think to this day I struggle to communicate well to even some of our own instructors is why it's so important to shelf those attributes and focus on the technique. Because at the end of the day, people will come back with, well, you need to use those attributes when you're competing. You want to be good at all of it. And my point has always been, I want you to have as much strength and as explosiveness and health and wind and all that stuff as you can possibly have, but I want you to use as little as you can in the gym. And there's been a few coaches in our organization who've modeled that very early on. I would put John Frankel at the top of that list. And then there's been a lot. And my point has always been, I want you to have as much strength and as explosiveness and health and wind and all that stuff as you can possibly have, but I want you to use as little as you can in the gym. And there's been a few coaches in our organization who've modeled that very early on. I would put John Frankel at the top of that list. And then there's been a lot, myself included, and others who took a little while to fully understand that. And then there's a lot to this day who I think still struggle with that concept. And I think you're one of those people who I think understands that concept now. So when you're talking to a young athletic jiu-jitsu, athlete who in his mind or her mind is thinking of competition and beating and getting the win, how is it you explain to those people when you have that conversation with them why it's so important to limit what you're doing there when you're on the mat physically?
Yeah, well, first of all, that was very what you just said was very polite, because the reality is I was one of the coaches and students who actually struggled with that concept. I wouldn't say the most, but definitely struggled with it a lot, to the point where it would make me angry in the past, especially as somebody who was at all the competitions and who was coaching fighters and was constantly in the battle when it came to competing.
So what would you say to yourself back then now?
Well, now, I definitely, I do understand it now. And what I tell my athletes now is like, look, those are things you already have.
Yeah.
Right. Those are things you already have. Like, we don't have to worry about that, because that's there. And what we're trying to do is take, if let's say my strength is math, and math comes naturally to me and I'm really good at math, I could avoid the subjects that I'm weak in and just continue to flourish where I'm already good.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, where does that get me? I end up being the same person today that I will be 10 years from now. But instead, if I look at attributes like, let's say I have a really good mount, but my cross-sides bottom game is awful. And so my logic is, well, I know what, I'll just never do cross-sides bottom and I'll focus on my mount. Well, my overall game doesn't get any better, right? Because I haven't spent time strengthening the parts of my body and the areas of my life that I'm weak in. I've just resorted back to what is already there. And people don't sign up at your gym to be as good as they are when they start. And so I just tell people, look, you're strong, or whatever. Weight's a better one, right? Because weight is weight. It's an attribute though. Like if I weigh 300 pounds and I know how to use my weight, then that can be a strength for me. But I don't need to spend time working on my weight. I maybe need to spend time on working on how to distribute my weight,
right.
But my weight is what my weight is. My
Yeah.
strength is what my strength is. My speed is my speed, my cardio, my flexibility, whatever attribute we're talking about. But the reality is, if instead I can, if it's impossible to do this, but if I could completely remove all of those things and focus just on the technique, then if I'm facing somebody who's big, strong, fast, whatever, my technique is going to be better than their technique. So now my technique, coupled with what was just a God-given, right? Like I didn't do anything, let's say, to be super flexible. Or let's say I didn't do anything, I was just born strong. Because some people are just naturally strong. They don't even lift weights and they just feel stronger than the next person. There's no, in my mind, there's no advantage to using your attributes when you're training.
Right.
And what I struggled with is I had this idea in my head that it was wrong to use those things, which I'm not telling people it's wrong to use those things. What I'm telling people is their technique is going to get better quicker if they can get rid of those things.
Yeah.
And then if they want to go, you know, fight for a world championship, of course they're going to try to, you know, if their technique fails, then of course they're going to try to use their strength or their speed to overcome a failed technique. But the possibility of their technique breaking down is going to be less than if they had spent time refining the technique without coupling it with the fact that they're just way bigger than their training partners, or they're way stronger than their training partners, younger, faster, whatever, you know, whatever their particular advantage is. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, but I just feel like
the only thing I would put in there is I always make a distinction between weight and everything else, because you weigh, like you just said, you weigh what you weigh.
Mm-hmm.
If you're exhausted and worn out and battle fatigued, or you have the flu or whatever, you still have your weight. And be able to distribute our weight properly is like an essential part of jiu-jitsu. So I've never really considered weight an attribute. It definitely gives you an advantage.
Yep, for sure.
But I think, and also I think smaller jiu-jitsu people need to feel that weight and learn how to deal underneath it. But things like strength and speed and explosiveness, once you're exhausted, things that deplete as you get worn down throughout the match, those are the things that we don't want to rely on. You know, what you're left with after you've Ironmanned 100 people, you're left with your body weight, and you're left with your jiu-jitsu technique, and everything else is gone. And that would be if I could put my students in that physical state every time they trained without tearing their body down, that would be the ultimate place for them to work. You know, and I think a lot of people struggle with that for all the reasons that you mentioned. So it's good to, I think that's one of the tougher ones that people have the hardest time with coming around to.
Something as simple, and I've seen Matt do this as well, but I'm attached to him, but nothing's happening here when I'm moving. I could push into him now, but if I attach to him, and I'll talk more about positive versus negative, but now there's pressure. See him, he's starting to get his base. Now when I move, he moves, right? And if he moves into me, yeah, so I have a good connection to him now. With those two, I have good connection. Make sense? Now with connection, I teach this to police officers too. I could have pepper spray in my eyes, I could have blood, you know, whatever it is. Once I have connection, it could be pitch black and I can't really see what's going on. I have awareness. Awareness of what? Awareness where they're at, awareness of their body. And I break the awareness down here. It's awareness of their base, and it's yours and theirs. So base, how based out are they? Are they easily sweepable, right? I have awareness of their posture, theirs and mine. Am I in a good spot in which I can escape or survive? So my survival posture. And then limbs, theirs and mine. Is my neck exposed? Are my arms exposed? Are my arms in a spot that they're not supposed to be? Once I have their awareness and mine, it also gives me the ability to kind of control movement. And I don't mean control, like, I remember going back and teaching the old guard pass, open the legs, it still exists, open the legs, control the hips. I tell students control the legs, right? So there they are, bear hugging the legs, and they're trying to like, coach, he can still move his legs. And I'm like, I don't mean like total dominant control. I mean just mitigate the movement, mitigate where they move. It's not freely or easily movable. Does that make sense? So connection gives me movement. I can control or mitigate that. And then it helps me speed or slow things down. One of my favorite, one memory from cross sides that makes, and it more of a top, but this teaches tempo. If you've ever been here with Matt, you know, he'll control you going in or out. So if you try to drive into him, right, he'll drive weight. If you try to go away, he'll catch this elbow. Then you'll get the arm in and you feel Go ahead and start to roll away. You feel like, no, yeah, you're away. So go back. The pressure gets let up to let you think that you're gone. And then all of a sudden the pressure gets really heavy. So turning it up, turning it down controls the speed at which he rolls, and I can control the movement. Does that make sense? With that, now, so we talk about, and this is top or bottom, doesn't really matter, but we're on bottom. Once I have those three, what's the beauty of this is it makes him predictable. Now that he's predictable, it gives me the initiative to be able to sweep, submit, sit out, attack, reverse, whatever you want to call it. I have those, that's my goal, right? But if I don't have this or start with that, I'm never going to get here. So everybody always tries to, I see is like they're out of posture. They're trying to create this stuff with their arms really not having a designated spot. And I don't think anymore that the arms are what help you escape. It's your shoulders, and we'll really get into that, okay? My rules are simple. My rules are get on top and be on top, and then get my head as far away from blunt force objects as possible. Do you follow that? So punches, kicks, whatever's in his hand. So I don't want to be escaping like this because then I'm taking damage versus here. There's where my dichotomy is. Which is it, right? I guess for self-defense, it would be guard. But I guess with hands and knees too, though, when I apply pressures like Matt teaches where you drive your shoulder into the body, you make it pretty difficult to hit them. I do remember rolling with Chris, my shoulder was not connected to him. I don't know that I had the ability in that position, which gave him the opportunity to hit me as clearly as he did. One other concept that was taught to me, and I don't know if Matt still teaches it, I haven't heard it in a while, but it's the most basic, but I think speaks volumes. Board and a ball. There's a ball on the bottom and a board on top. And that kind of goes back to my whole rounding out thing. So his goal is to squish the ball, right? So if I'm on my edge, controlling inside space, he's gonna cross face me, separate my knee from my chest, and flatten me out like a ball or board. But in that, if I can ball him up, now make him a ball like me, now I can roll him. So there's that balance of postures. Can I break his posture down and turn him into a ball, or can he break my posture down and turn me into a board? She was going flat, and he goes, no, you're not receiving. Just like Frankel and Coach Frankel, Coach Thornton, and Whittier teach receiving posture from Mount. There's this receiving posture, and I think those were the words he used, from cross sides. I'm flat on my back, which I'm not saying you won't be, but she was going from here and then working, right? Versus when he was passing, what he had her do, so they could see it, what he had her do was she was here and she was balled up. And she was not allowing herself to be flattened out. So as Hickson drove into her, she stayed balled, and then it was easy to roll because she just stayed like this, like a ball. Versus going like this and then going, dead in the water. So there's your ball and board. Then you talk about arms inside and outside or blended. And what I mean by that is inside is here, right? I've got inside space. This is good. And I don't want him to split my arms. I know Matt teaches that. But what happens is if this arm gets out, now I've got kind of a blend inside and outside. Or now he has cross face. Now I've got kind of both outside. Does that make sense? Or I could have this arm here. So I still have a blend. Not necessarily inside space, but better. And you got to work with what you've got, okay? And you got to give your arms something to do. They cannot just hang out there. And you can't just, can you? Yes. Grab gis and pull them, but what happens when there is no gi and you offset them this way? I want to see you, which we're going to really enforce, is escaping with your shoulders. If anything you get out of this entire seminar is I really want you to just have more awareness of your shoulders and what your shoulders are doing.
What did work when we were fighting always came from sports. In every single case, it came from a combat sport. So judo, wrestling, Greco-Roman wrestling, Muay Thai, boxing, those are all sports. And that's when I realized that the reason why some martial arts work and some martial arts don't is aliveness. And aliveness is timing, energy, and motion when you're drilling. And every combat sport in the world uses it because they care about results. They want to win. And if you want to win and you care about results, if what you care about If you really care about something enough that the results matter, you will use some form of competition, right? The moment you take competition out of the process, you rest assured you or whoever's doing it really doesn't care. Like, it doesn't make a big difference. It's not a war. It's not a sport where you really want to win. It's not whether you're going to go bankrupt or not with your business. As soon as you take competition out, you're saying by proxy, we don't really care about the results of this particular thing, right? They use competition. They all drilled with aliveness. And a lot of people, when I would say that, would think that I meant like full contact sparring. That means you got to go super hard and put the gloves on. And that's not actually what I mean at all. You guys have trained here know you can train in a very gentle, relaxed way and still train with aliveness. You can do jiu-jitsu in a very relaxed, safe, functional way at a slow pace and is still alive. It's not in a pattern, right? Traditional martial arts, make-believe martial arts are always in a pattern. They're choreographed. One person does this, and usually they strike and then they hold their hand out for a second, and then the other person does a bunch of cool-looking shit. But what you have to watch is you have to watch you don't watch the guy doing the demonstration, you watch the dummy he's doing the demonstration on. That's what you need to watch. Whether it's Aikido or Wing Chun or karate, the dummy guy, his uke is always just freezing in place and letting the other person do all the stuff, what Bruce Lee called dissecting a corpse. So traditional martial arts, fantasy-based martial arts are sclerotic patterns that are choreographed that you memorize. Functional martial arts, by definition, combat sports where you introduced to the functional movement and then you isolate it with aliveness and then you do the sport and you repeat the process, just like wrestlers train, right? That's aliveness. So that was my big epiphany for martial arts. And the reason why I named my school Straight Blast Gym, because at the time, all the other schools around, martial arts schools, the Jeet Kune Do schools, because there was no MMA or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school really in existence yet. There was some in LA. They were all called Academy or Institute or something like that. And I was looking at the guys training in Japan, and I was looking at Hickson, and to me, it looked like a gym. It looked like you'd go in there. You're not going to go in there with a notebook and exchange 5 different patterns with each other and click some sticks together and walk out completely with a completely dry shirt, right? That's a martial arts academy. I wanted to go somewhere where you're going to train, you're going to get physical, you're going to be sweating. So gym. And Straight Blast Gym was just a homage to the Straight Blast. And Straight Blast is a technique, one of the few techniques that we kept when I first opened up my own school, still from Jeet Kune Do. Okay, and that technique evolved in a very short period of time, within the course of about a year, 2 years, to what we do now, which is a very simple, very powerful way to strike that anybody can use. And what made me decide to do this for a class at the camp, besides just using it as a vehicle to bore everybody with the history of the gym, was a conversation I was having with John Frankel last month when he was here, and we were talking about how jiu-jitsu works in terms of shoulder rotation and power. And it dawned on me that's exactly the same. That's the reason why this technique works. It works for the same reason you get power in jiu-jitsu. And so there's a really good connection, and it's a way for me to teach that to you guys. So that's what we're going to work on.
It seems like you're just tying together fundamental movements, and so you're like doing an airplane and then doing a bridge or doing a reverse shrimp, and then it's like you're just stringing these together and it's making, in the context of whatever you're doing, right? Like that's how it works, right?
So yes, so you start from the basic, right? You got to have the connection to the ground, then connection to myself, then connection to you. Mm-hmm. And then the connection to you is going to be my frames. With those frames now I'm going to start adding in that movement.
Yeah.
And the movement doesn't have to be independent movement either, right? If you just bridge, that's just one thing. But if I bridge and scoot in, or bridge and shoulder walk, or I blend the movements versus making it 1, 2, 3. I make it like a 1, 2, 3 crushed together. Yeah. So I think that's a higher level when you start to do that no hands drill. That will bring those movements out more, especially the slower you do it, because you start to realize, oh, I can blend these movements. I don't want to bridge and then let go, because if I do, because I've given up that space I just made. Because we talked about bottom and top. The bottom person wants to make space, right? So I just made this space, But I'll watch people do it. They'll make the space and then they'll collapse again.
Yeah.
They'll make the space, they'll collapse again. They'll go to pass guard and then they'll give their hips back again.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, no, I took that space. I own that real estate.
Right.
Keep
So
going.
you have your base and posture and your connection, and then that's the timing, which is the pacing at which these things are being put
And the
together.
connection is going to help you slow that movement down for them if you
Yeah.
have a really good connection. Like, remember, I trapped your arm. Now all of a sudden you can't move as well.
Right. So my timing's screwed up. Well, you get to have good timing. Yeah, that's
Right?
cool.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're trying to make space, he's trying to take space, right? And that's, again, chest-to-chest connection where do I disconnect him? He's got chest-to-chest. Oh, my God, heavy. Roll my shoulders forward. I make this concave. Now I've disconnected him from my chest, and now he's onto these stronger points, which are my shoulders. And maybe now I make some more. So by my connection, I am disconnecting him, so to speak. I am taking him from a better connection that he has, like taking away my breath and crushing me.
Interesting to think about as it relates to like your own emotional state or performance states, I guess. Like, for example, when people have a lot of anxiety, you teach them to connect to the environment. So don't focus on your internal connection so much because there's chaos going on inside of you. So in order to like gain control over that, you put external connection, like focus on what you see, what you can smell, what you can hear, all that kind of stuff. And then you could flip that around where it's like there's too much going on around you. It's like you're not functioning, you can't perform properly. You transition and you take your connection inwards. And then you could do the same thing like with your partner if, you know, you feel like maybe they have a vibe that you don't really like or whatever, but you want to survive and you want to make it through there, and then you kind of remove your connection almost like emotionally or mentally from them and kind of create your own space.
Like the breathing exercises that we've been kind of incorporating, like they've been incorporating the breathing exercises in the beginning, you know, and it's like, you know, X's book is called Breathing. It's all about like, you know, like focusing and centering on that,
learning to control what it is that you're concentrating on.
Yeah,
Like,
being in the moment,
Yeah.
right?
And work with what you have.
You're saying everything I've said, and, and that connection goes so much deeper. You just say that word connection, and people are yeah, and that, and then when you break down connection to yourself, it's absolutely mindset and breathing, you know. And then again, you come onto the mat. There's people who'll come to the gym, and you know, I won't give names. I'm sure they'll figure it out, but they'll come to the gym, and it's just like, don't bring that on the mat. And I understand if you're having a hard day, but you're coming here to let go of that. So be connected to the people in here, be connected to the mat, be connected to the role. Let that stuff go. It'll be there when you're done. That's why you're here. You know, be a good training partner not only for them, but also for yourself. So that connection is so much deeper than just the bodies, right?
How do you balance your fitness, your weight training, your recovery, your jiu-jitsu, family, your job? Like what's a daily, like a weekly schedule for you look like?
Okay. I've tinkered with this for quite some time. I remember a time where I was working out too much and my jiu-jitsu suffered because my body was so sore. Like it would like he touched me and I just couldn't move right. So I was like, I've got to back off on the volume that I'm doing. So I've tinkered with that back and forth. I'm pretty solid now and just understanding what my body wants. And so I do 4 days a week of weights. And it's roughly an hour. Sometimes it's 45 minutes. Sometimes it's an hour and 15, but that's about it. And my weights are structured around the three main lifts: bench, deadlift, and squat. And I'll usually do like a heavier weight, lower rep on that. And then I'll do a lot of accessory work, kind of like Jim Windler's 5-3-1. Huge fan of that guy. Mm-hmm. I did his workout for years. And now I'm doing a program on the phone, which is pretty easy. And I think Leah Taylor still does it. She said she loved it. It's Juggernaut AI. Mm-hmm. And it's a really easy way to follow it. I used to personal train, but I hate writing up my own workouts. My wife will ask me for one, I'll write her one up, but I hate doing my own. So this just makes it easy for me to follow someone telling me what to do. I go in and I do it. So Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, I do weights, and I get up super early and do it. And it's not, everybody's like, oh, it's Jocko. It's not. It's my wife, actually, that got me to do it. Because I was working, and especially when I took this new position, I'm always on call. So I'd get in there to work out, and I'd get phone calls from work. and it was always things to handle. And my workouts would take in 2.5, 3 hours sometimes. And I was so mad. And she was like, you're insufferable. And if you don't start figuring a workout, I'll kill you. She says, why don't you do it in the morning? So I pouted like a big fat baby. And I was like, no, I shouldn't have to. But I got up super early and I did the workout. And I've been doing it for probably 2 or 3 years now. And I will stick to that. So I get up about, I wake up naturally now, like 4:20.
Wow.
I wake up about 4:20, 4:30 in the morning. I wake up, go to the bathroom, get dressed, right into the gym. And then I'm done working out anytime, 6 o'clock. And then I do a little studying, and then I eat my breakfast, and then off to work. But that's the weights. And then on Wednesdays, my recovery on that, my Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays, I try to stretch. And I do stretch more. Like when I tore this tendon, which wasn't from weightlifting, my physical therapist, which I still go to. So physical therapy, I've really found I actually like just going consistently for prehab. And she just works my hips. She works my back. She works anything and she gets me doing these stretches, and she's actively got me doing all this. So that's my recovery work. And then I teach and do jiu-jitsu on Mondays and Saturdays. And then I've been going on Tuesdays and Fridays with my son. Not lately, but I'm going to get back into that. So I'll do jiu-jitsu 4 days a week as well. So the Tuesdays and Fridays, I get to just roll a lot. Even on Mondays and Saturdays, after class, after I teach, I try to roll with as many people as I can. And it's good to just kind of feel that. I do Element. That keeps me going. LMNT, Rob stuff. That stuff really helps me sleep better, and it also helps me with the working out. Yeah. So I think I answered that. I mean, I don't do any kind of bro split or anything like that. Like I said, the Juggernaut AI, and I'm not, I don't get any money from them. What's really cool about it is AI. It asks you questions like, how much sleep did you get? It asks you how you feel, if you're sore, and you answer these questions, and it'll actually dial up weight.
Well, I think we got it, though. It's AI, which Glenn will love, applied to training, which is awesome. Something you and I have talked about for a long time, almost 3 decades, which is, but there's always new people coming into the martial arts, always new people joining the organization. So it's one of those things, we're probably always going to have to talk about. And that's the idea that there's martial arts for street and martial arts for sport. And I'm going to divide it up into 2 categories. In one category, you'll have people who maybe come from what I would call a fantasy-based martial art, traditional martial art that doesn't work. And when they hear about combat sports being effective or functional, they'll immediately say, yeah, but that's for the street. And in UFC, they have rules. And in fights, going to be multiple opponents, weapons, and on and on. You hear that all the time. Mm-hmm. And there's another kind of version of that question that I think is newer and more legitimate that comes from some of the old school jiu-jitsu people, like, for example, Professor Fabio Santos, where they've expressed concern that within the community of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, you have a lot of the vale tudo, which was the jiu-jitsu that you and I started with in the early 90s, where we're always doing jiu-jitsu for fighting, is starting to disappear, and it's being replaced by jiu-jitsu that's pretty much designed for IBJJF, for that point system. So those are two very different, I think, ways to approach questions, different types of questions. So let's start with the first one. When you have people who will bring up that street versus sport fallacy after doing this for multiple decades, how do you answer that now?
I answer it still the same way that we've always answered it, which is that take a guy who has a high level of skill or even a medium level of skill with boxing or Muay Thai, some sort of delivery system. That's one. I think that was one of the kind of the genius things behind what we did was when you coined the term delivery system, it took away a lot of that argument, because it's like, listen, if I have a guy who's decent level boxing or Muay Thai, either one of those two, on a regular basis, he's able to touch a moving, resisting opponent in the face with a gloved fist. How hard is it going to be for me to take that same person and say, listen, I just need you to open your hand and put your fingers in their eye.
Right.
That guy's probably going to be able to do it a lot easier with a lot more efficiency and effectiveness than someone who never reaches that level of skill against a resisting opponent. It's one thing to do it against a dummy or somebody who's just kind of letting you do what you're doing, but to do it against a resisting opponent. So that was, I feel like those answers are still valid answers to that question, where we're working against resistance. It's just a simple tweak of a few things to make it street ready, kind of. You're basically walking around with like a Shelby 350 or Cobra type car that you can drive on the street, but we tweak it a little and now it's a race car,
Right.
you know? And so I feel like those kind of arguments or points rather were always a little like grasping at straws. Like it's not really a thing, because the second I tell somebody, or I think you had an encounter too with somebody where they looked at you and said, well, what if I hit you in the nuts when you were in a knee ride position on them, and you put your thumb on their eye and say, well, I'll just gouge your eyeball out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, it should be self-evident, you know, that if I'm in a better position or I'm better able to use my hands and move and hit you, my ability to eye jab you is probably going to be a lot better, a lot higher percentage than your ability if you don't have those skills. And so, yeah, I always kind of felt like to us it was obvious, but to guys that weren't dealing with high-level athletes or training in an athletic environment, maybe that's why they weren't seeing it. Like, it's really hard to hit somebody who's trying to hit you back,
Right.
you know? And so now you want me to try to do some weird, it's just.
Yeah, I think people sometimes think, or they're told, that there's some kind of special escape from mount position for, let's say, for example, that's street, you know, that's different from what we do in a competition or in MMA, and trying to explain to people that controlling a body is controlling a body, whether it's in the parking lot or the gym, is hard to get across if they haven't done it. I think once people do a little jiu-jitsu, they can kind of immunize themselves from that.
Started training with Matt, just loved it, loved everything we did. At the same time, concurrently, I was a police officer, and I was working in a town that's pretty busy. And we were, like most places, we're about 100 officers understaffed, that kind of thing. And just running, you know, call to call to call every day. And I was having an opportunity to get tangled up with people on a regular basis. Everywhere from just harsh words up to, you know, weapons, and having to deal with that and solve that problem. And in the beginning, I had an issue with a guy. He was an enforcer for a gang. I ran into him, and it came out as a very benign call. It came out as a vehicle versus a house accident, traffic accident. So I go back there, I find this, it's back in a maze. You know how like typically around parks, you know, like a street will, like say you have like North Street, it runs into the park, and then it continues on the other side of the park. So this was one of those things where there's a park right in the middle of this line of streets. We couldn't find it. The homeowner was just like, hey, the guy's out here in the car screaming. I don't know if he's hurt or what's going on. So we get there, finally find it. I get there by myself. I'm on probation. And so I'm complete rookie. Like my shoes, like there's guys that I'm working with, their shoes have more time on the job than I do, right? So I'm just a complete rookie. I find the guy, he's sitting in the car and he's agitated. And he had run into the side of this house, probably doing the same thing we were doing, driving around this park trying to figure out how the streets work. And he was drunk and on PCP and a whole bunch of other stuff we found out later. And so I walk up to the car and I'm like, you know, sir, can you step out of the car? I'm still thinking like medical emergency. Like he's bumped his head or he's hurt in some way. And I'm like, can you please step out of the car? Blah, blah, blah. And he just starts screaming, fuck you, pig. I'm a cop killer. And I was like, okay. So, all right, but are you injured? You know, I'm still thinking like, are you hurt? You know, and I'm just like, whatever, man, you're angry. And long story short, he gets out of the car. He was going up and down, you know, like just massive mood shifts to screaming, to crying, to screaming, to, is everything okay, officer? Like, you know what I mean? Like that weird, like, and I'm not tracking him. I'm not keeping up with his pace that he's setting. And finally he goes, you want me to get out of the car? And I was like, that would be awesome. Just get out of the car. So I could just get out of the car. For one, when he ran into the side of the house, he hit the gas pipe that feeds the house, you know, propane, whatever it is. And I was like, man, let's get away from this because it's starting to smell out here like gas. And so he looks at me, he says, you want me to get out of the car? I was like, that'd be fantastic. You know, get out of the car. As he gets out of the car, he swings and clips me, catches me on the side of the head, dumps me into the car or into the side of the car, and then it's on. And we're just scrapping. And he's a big kid. He's like 240, 250. And we're scrapping. Somewhere in there, I slipped and fell and ended up under the car door. I'm trying to push myself up. I'm stuck under the car door. I'm trying to get up, and he's kicking me in the head. And then somewhere in there, I noticed my gun's loose. And so then we're fighting over the gun. The gun's under my chin, back under his. We're fighting back and forth. I can feel his finger pressing the trigger because my hand is, we're both grabbing the gun. And what saved me from getting killed was the gun got pushed out of battery. So the slide got pushed down so that the trigger was being pressed, but it wouldn't ignite. So it was malfunctioned. So that's what saved my life, not my great skill or anything like that. But so we end up, long story short, end up basically throwing him onto the ground. And once we hit the ground, I went into jiu-jitsu mode. See, standing, I was trying to do everything they taught me in the academy. I was trying to do like the PPCT. I was trying to do like the brachial stun. And I was trying to do all these things they had taught me to do because I had this disconnect between what I do every day and what I thought would work in a street fight. Does that make sense? Like I had this thought in my head, like there's still this mystical difference. There's this divide between the two. And we're fighting in the street and we're fighting over my gun. And so I got to do magical stuff, right? And then when we hit the ground, we get to the ground and I went right into jiu-jitsu mode. I'm knee riding him and I'm just basically doing classic old school jiu-jitsu where you knee ride the guy like the old pictures of Hickson knee riding a guy and punching him in the face. I'm just knee riding and cracking him. He turns over just like every Gracie jiu-jitsu, you know, Gracie in action video we've ever watched, right? The old school stuff where the guy turns over onto his belly. I get on his back and I'm like, and put him unconscious. Handcuff him, sit him up just as my backup gets here. Now, meanwhile, my back, I can hear sirens. Like my radio got knocked open, right? The key got bashed open so they can hear us fighting. And they can hear, you know, me saying, let go of my gun. So they know it's getting bad. So I can see, you know, lights driving. They're trying to figure out how to get to me, but the park's in the way. They finally get there and they're like, what the heck? Like they turn him over and he's messed up. Like it required 67 sutures to put his face back together. And everybody gets sorted out. We get everything put away. And I sat there and I was like, what in the world was I doing? Like, why didn't I just like crack and take down? Like, why didn't I just like get hit? I get hit harder than this in the gym every day. So this is 2000. So this is right after I had trained with Matt. I was already an instructor in a straight place gym. Like I was already like doing what we do every day. But mentally I was thinking, well, you know, brachial stun, control the arm, you know, armbar takedown, and none of this stuff is working. You know, meanwhile in the gym every day, I'm just cracking dudes in the face and I'm getting cracked and I'm working takedowns. But then I thought, when we got to the ground, I just went straight into jiu-jitsu mode. Why did I go into jiu-jitsu mode? Because in the police academy and in all the training we had after the police academy, never once did we do groundwork. So my only option for ground was what I always did. So I immediately clicked into, let's do some jiu-jitsu, bro. You know, and then I wrecked them. And so I had to go back and think about why I did that. And then also realize that it's ridiculous to think there needs to be a divide. And from that point forward, I just did what we do all the time. Whether it's just a drunken dude who just needs to be sat down or escorted off the bus or whatever the case may be, or if it's some guy trying to kill me, which occurred again several times, right? Working undercover and in other capacities, people try to kill me numerous times. I always just did sports stuff. I always just boxed them, judoed them, or jiu-jitsu'd them, or a combo of the three.
When I was at Hickson's for my blue belt, before I got it, but soon before I got it, Luis made the comment to us all. He's like, white to blue belt, basically, if you get a blue belt, at least what we're teaching at Hickson's, it's like, you're not going to lose a fight.
You
like,
can fight.
Yeah, you're not going to lose a fight to a guy who knows nothing. You might get unlucky and meet an Olympic judoka or something, but 1 out of a million people are Olympic judoka or D1 wrestler or whatever. He's like, the fights you're thinking of, A, they're avoidable, and B, you're going to win if you have a blue belt here, right? And so if that's all you wanted, that's all you need. But then if you want to do jiu-jitsu, and he said, and that's what he said, from blue belt on, jiu-jitsu is just to test your jiu-jitsu against another guy who does jiu-jitsu, and that should be fun. But you already know how to fight, right? And so now you're a purple belt, and you want to see if you can hang with other purple belts, and you're a brown belt, can you hang with other brown belts? So right after that white to blue curriculum, no one's going to hold you down in a headlock, no one's going to be able to sucker punch you, no one's going to be able to do any of that stuff to you, and if they do, you're going to wind up on top punching them or choking them unconscious. But after that, it's like you want to train for 30, 40, 50 years and you want it to be fun, and then it's like, okay, maybe I'm young and I want to do tournaments. Well, then leg locks come in. Maybe I'm old like me and I don't want to do tournaments, but I want to coach people who do tournaments, and so I still need to understand that game, and you know, so
Yeah.
but it's more optional unless you're doing,
for sure.
So a great distinction that I only heard about a year ago from Henry is there's jiu-jitsu and there's submission grappling. And so, you know, leg locks are part of submission grappling, whether that's gi legal IBJJF leg locks or no gi heel hooks and all that. Basically, it's a trained grappling response to the problem I'm giving. It's not a self-defense. Yeah, it's not a self-defense situation. And so it's, in that sense, it's optional.
Yeah. Yeah, some of the coaches will run thought experiments by me. Sometimes Adam does this a lot with his question that he'll pose. It's like, okay, you have 3 weeks to train a group of people, and what are the 5 things you're going to show them, that kind of thing.
Not leg locks.
No, on any of those kind of lists, leg locks aren't anywhere on the list, right? You've got your headlock escapes and guillotine counters and guillotine and, you know, body lock, mount, bridge and roll.
Yep.
You got 10,000 things that you put on the list before footlock. We're talking about fighting. It really is a trained grappler versus trained grappler type scenario. And even back then I knew, because in the late 90s and early 2000s, I did get a chance to roll with a lot of quote-unquote submission grapplers, not jiu-jitsu submission grapplers, but like the Shuto guys and even some Sambo guys, and never experienced anything close to a problem of escaping a footbox, because everything was loose and you could just, there was no positional control.
Right. Yeah.
It was basically just flowing from one lock to the other, which is exactly what you want to train people not to do.
Right. Right.
So that's changed now, because like you said, the jiu-jitsu guys are doing that are high-level black belts at everything, and they have the leg locks.
Yeah, and they're using their previous knowledge to treat leg locks like mount or cross slides, where it's like, first, how do I hold you here?
Yeah.
How do I immobilize you? How do I make this, I'm 100% on offense and you're 100% on defense, and then they'll grab your foot.
Right.
You know, it's totally different than just grabbing and hoping.
Yeah.
And that's part of the danger thing too, is because there was no positional control, I either had to go slow, in which case you'd spin out, and so it's like that doesn't work anyway, or I had to go so fast that you were injured before you could tap, and it's, well, it works, but it's too dangerous. So two opposite ends of the spectrum, both arguing for why you can't do this or shouldn't do this.
Right.
The last couple of years where I've really been thinking of what makes the perfect training environment. Because over the 30 years I've been doing jiu-jitsu, I've had students and people who've gone from white belt to black belt with no training to world-class competitors, and I've seen people do it quickly and efficiently and really well, and I've seen people who've been blue belts for 25 years. And I've seen both, and one of the questions I think myself as a coach and other coaches ask ourselves all the time is why, what can we do to change that up and to get people good at this art as quickly as possible? And I think I have a formula for that now. And like all my formulas, It's a triangle because I love triangles. And so I call that the performance triangle, right? You can't have a stool with 2 legs. You need those 3 legs to have good base. So the triangle means that often as well, but for me, I usually find that anything I think is important, it usually breaks down to 3 main points. So when we're talking about performance, I'm going to go into this in depth as we go, but the 3 things are environment, curriculum, and training method. You have to have a great training environment. You need to have the correct curriculum, which, as you guys know here, is always going to evolve around fundamentals. And then, of course, the training method is what sets everything else apart. And it's a combination of the 3 that creates skill, good skill.